Hello, BookTube. This is part 11 of Science Fiction and Fantasy, the continuation of my 2020 library tour. Now let's get started. First up is The Sleeping Dragon by Joel Rosenberg. It's the first part in the Guardians of the Flame series. Next is The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. This is about a orcish priestess who is basically raised to be sacrificed to this sort of dark god. And she's rescued by a wizard who turns her into an agent, basically an assassin. And during a mission to find an item the wizard wants, she falls in love with a young woman from a sort of a dimension-hopping empire. And yeah, she subsequently betrays the wizard to rescue her lover. I liked the book well enough, although I did have some issues with some of the characterization of some of the characters, or how Larkwood approached some of the characters. But on the whole, I quite liked it, and would like to have another go at it sometime when I have the chance. Now here are two books I did like. The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan. This is sort of a steampunk, new weird, urban epic fantasy set in the city of Guerdon, in which, let me remember the character's name. It's about three street kids. One in kind of a returnee wanderer, the son of a famous mob boss revolutionary, and a ghoul. And each one of the three play a role in the various machinations that result in a crisis for Guerdon. And I really enjoyed this book. It has a rough opening, and one of the characters is a bit troublesome, but I really enjoyed it. And I am looking forward to having another go at it when the third book in the series is released. I do want to read the entire series around that time if I can manage it. Next up is the second book in the series, The Shadow Saint. This is a sequel to the first book. The main character from the first book is more of a supporting character in this one. And this one's more about an agent from another country trying to ingratiate himself within Guerdon. Next up is The Gates of Stone by Angus MacAllan, a part of the Lords of the Islands series. Basically, in this case, it's sort of the main character's somewhat more heroic Cersei Lannister, who flees her homeland and tries to take over these island countries. All the while, there are other shenanigans from a sorcerer who would like more power and another character. It's been a while since I've read it. I didn't quite like my first go around, but I want to have another go at it at some point. And see if there are any sequels. Next up is Middle Game by Shannon McGuire. This is a contemporary urban epic fantasy in which alchemists try to create a god entity. But in order to create this entity, it has to be split into two people who have sort of opposite sides of the whole. And this is the story of Roger and Dodger, who basically split math and language between them. Dodger she's an incredibly brilliant mathematician. Dodger is incredibly brilliant with language, and they eventually connect and are broken apart, and then they're brought back together and separate again, and then eventually they do come back together to thwart the plans of the alchemist who created them, because he's basically created a newer model that he sees as more easily controlled and more closer to achieving what he wants, rather than Roger and Dodger. I didn't particularly care for the novel. I thought it was, there are some really good bits, but I didn't particularly care for Roger or Dodger as characters or as protagonists. And next up are the first two novels in the Wrath and Ethnium series by Naman Gilbert Tillahan. This is The Root. This is about Eric, a former actor, child actor, going to high school in San Francisco, who discovers that he is essentially a demigod, and that he is recruited into this organization to sort of fight the invasion of other god or demon-like entities who are kidnapping children with demigod type abilities. At the same time, there's this other city called, what's it called? Zebub, in which it seems to be where some of these entities are coming from, or like another world entirely, where an apprentice named, blanking on her name, Lil, comes into her own, discovering her own magic and getting into some trouble. I like the idea of the novels. I love Eric's voice, but the problem is way too many characters get point of view chapters, and I don't think many, if not most of them, don't really. I think the novel would work a lot better had it just been Eric and Lil. It's just like alternating, even though to a certain extent they don't quite meet up. I don't remember. But I think really just like one or the, just focused on them rather than like every character who pops up getting their own POV chapter. I thought it was distracting, and some of those characters aren't really well done. And this is the sequel, The Tree. The Fruit should be coming out in June. Although it's basically been like the pub date's been kind of pushed back repeatedly over the past few years, because I think it's like 2 or 3 years it's taken to get the fruit. So I'm not entirely sure whether or not the fruit's going to finally be published this coming year, or if it'll get pushed back. Next up is a series called The Loom Saga by Elise Kova. This is The Alchemist of Loom. and the Dragons of Nova. And next we have two of my favorite books from the past few years, the Crescent City series. First up is The City of Lost Fortunes by Brian Camp. This is a urban fantasy set in post-Katrina New Orleans, in which Jude Dubuisson, demigod with the power to find anything missing, is brought back into the magical demi-monde of New Orleans to participate in a game of poker, only to eventually see the game result in the murder of the fortune god of New Orleans and the other players jockeying for position as the new fortune god. This is really, I love this novel. And the sequel, Gather the Fortunes. In this novel, the protagonist shifts from Jude to an allied character from the first book, who I'm blanking on her name, Renaissance Reigns, which I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, who has become a psychopomp, who's been split in two. One part of her focuses on the living world, the other part takes over in the afterlife. And the living part of her, or the part of her in the living world, is tasked with collecting the soul of this one young man who doesn't actually die. And from there snowballs a crisis that threatens the future of New Orleans. So, moving on from more recent fantasy, we have a Conan pastiche. This is Conan the Savage by Leonard Carpenter. I read this, I had this book like in the late 90s, early 2000s, probably shortly after the heyday of the tour Conan pastiches. And I had a small collection of them, which I had gotten rid of, and picked this one up from Golden's, which this might very well have been the copy I had. Who knows? But anyway. So in this case, Conan ends up doing something that gets him into the mines. He eventually escapes and joins this tribe. All the while, in the kingdom of Barthunia, a young girl finds or inadvertently creates a sort of demon doll that sort of possesses her. And as she grows up, she eventually forms a cult and eventually takes over Barthunia. And her armies eventually attack the tribe Conan's joined, and Conan seeks revenge. Next up is a book I saw on Steve Donohue's channel and decided I wanted to pick it up. So this made an appearance in his last library tour, and I think he's talked about it before, and I put it on my Libris wish list, and it's sat there for months or if not a year or more. But this is Universe 10 by Terry Carr, or edited by Terry Carr. Next up we have a series that was, its publication order was, well, not publication order, but how it was published is quite unique, in that the entire series was written before publication, and each book was released like in form. So it's like, I think the first book was published in January or February, and then each subsequent book was published in the following month. I think they came out this year. Um, but it's the Nine Realms series by Sarah Kozlov. This is A Queen in Hiding. It's about a young princess, Cerulia, whose mother has been overthrown, and she's in hiding until eventually she creates an ability. Probably her magic comes into its own, and she manages to create an army or find her way back on the throne at some point. Anyway, I didn't particularly. I bailed on this book. It was one of my first bails of the year. I thought it was. The world building bugged me. And I thought I didn't quite buy the overthrow, honestly. I think that's kind of what set me off, but I probably should give it another go. Although I don't know really if I should buy the entire, the last two books in the series, or just read these two and then decide whether or not I want to pick up the other two if I like them. Or just eventually get rid of these two. But anyway, the next up is The Queen of Raiders, again by Sarah Kozlov, and this is book 2 in the Nine Realms series. So this is an omnibus edition from Ursula K. Le Guin. It includes The Left Hand of Darkness, Rokanan's World, Planet of Exile, City of Illusions, and The Word for World is Forest, which is a really good short novel. Read it a few years ago, well, probably more like 10 years ago, because I picked this up from the Friends of the Library book sale quite a while ago, like more than a decade ago, and I've read The Word for World is Forest and quite enjoyed it. The other stories I haven't actually gotten to except for The Left Hand of Darkness, which I think I set aside, which I really should probably get to. Next is A People's Future of the United States. This is an anthology of left-wing, almost exclusively pessimistic science fiction, playing off of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. So I picked it up last year, and I read some of the stories, and the stories I read didn't really appeal to me all that much. I will probably give it another go, but yeah, I wasn't, unfortunately, terribly impressed. And finally, another book that I had some issue with, and I bailed on last year, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is an epic fantasy that sort of revolves around dragons. In several countries, one of which has a sort of sacred queen who's new on her throne and who's dealing with various machinations at home. It also deals with a country that has long since been isolated, which is basically Japan, who have a very different relationship to dragons than most of the rest of the world. And it deals with a young dragon rider and one of the merchants who've come over from one of the other countries nearer to the one with the Sacred Queen. I didn't really like it. I thought the characters really put me off, and if I wanted to read about the Dutch in Japan, I would hunt down a history of the Dutch in Japan, or sort of Japan, that period of Japanese history, the Tokugawa shogunate. Which I really do want a history of that. Anyway, so I might come back to The Priory of the Orange Tree sometime this year if I have time. Which, yeah, given how long it is. I think it's 800 some odd pages. Yeah. I'll need to find a lot of time for it, but yeah. It was not, unfortunately, one of my favorites. So anyway, BookTube, that was part 11 of the science fiction and fantasy set part of my 2020 library tour. I will be right back with part 12, and I will see you in a few. So anyway, BookTube, until next time, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.